Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second panel in this conference on the 60th anniversary of God and Man at Yale. Bill Buckley wrote or edited 40 nonfiction books at last count. Cancel Your Own Goddamn Subscription was the last to be published during his lifetime, and two appeared posthumously, Flying High, Remembering Barry Goldwater, and finally The Reagan I Knew. As his son Christopher said, Bill Buckley published more books when he was dead than many authors do alive. But God and Man at Yale was the first. Unlike many of Bill's later works, this one remains in print 60 years after its publication. Our panel this afternoon will discuss why, not as a publishing matter, but as an intellectual one, this should be the case. What is living and what is dead in the thought of God and man at Yale? Why and to what extent does it remain relevant to man and even to Yale? Trusting God and the author to settle the third matter between themselves now. A peculiarity of the book, as was noted in the first panel, is that Bill Buckley doesn't describe himself, certainly not consistently, as a conservative in this book. He calls himself a Christian individualist. The only thing he repeatedly identifies as conservative is Yale, or rather Yale's reputation as, quote, a citadel of conservatism, unquote. Whatever one makes of the difference that 60 years has wrought at Yale and elsewhere, no one would be moved to think of Yale now as a citadel of conservatism, either by reputation or in reality. To discuss these questions and their ramifications, we have three excellent panelists this afternoon. And my principal duty is to introduce them. Midge Decter is neoconservative royalty. The wife and the mother of the editor of Commentary magazine.
It's a neat trick.
That's right, that's it. Two successive editors of Commentary magazine, which I think makes a dynasty. In her own right, of course, she is a distinguished critic of contemporary morals and politics. She was the executive director of the Committee for the Free World, which disbanded after it had saved the free world. She's the author of, among other books, An Old Wife's Tale, and serves as a board member of the Heritage Foundation. Roger Kemble, who'll speak second, wears an amazing number of hats. He is the publisher and the president of Encounter Books, one of the one of the best conservative publishers in the country. He is the author of, he's the editor and the publisher of The New Criterion, the distinguished magazine of cultural criticism. And he's the author of many books, including Tenured Radicals, How Politics Has Corrupted Higher Education, and his forthcoming volume, The Fortunes of Permanence, Culture and Anarchy in the Age of Amnesia. With Linda Bridges, who is here and will be chairing the third panel this afternoon, Mr. Kimball edited Athwart History, the sprightly and indispensable anthology of Bill Buckley's writings that appeared last year. Our third speaker will be R. Emmett Tyrrell, the founder and editor-in-chief of the distinguished magazine, The American Spectator. He has written many provocative books, and certainly none more provocative than the New York Times best-selling Boy Clinton, the political biography. His latest volume, which came out just a few months ago, is called After the Hangover, The Conservatives' Road to Recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin with Midge Decter.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I never live at peace with this technology. So it's difficult for me to tell you adequately just how delighted I am to be here on this occasion, especially here in New Haven, where I have not been since sometime in the winter of 1970 on a few days' visit, whose sights and sounds, I will confess to you, have never quite left me. The occasion I'm speaking of took place during what was either the first or second year. I can't remember anything, and I certainly can't remember that. The first or second year that young women had first been accepted as undergraduates in this school. And as you may not by now begin to imagine, because things have progressed so happily, the interest in the presence of these new female students on this campus was, it is no exaggeration to say, both deep and wide. I had been invited by Yale to spend some time here as a visiting journalist, which meant, in my case, that I was then working as an editor on a certain national monthly magazine which had recently, with no more than a mild degree of accuracy, acquired the reputation of being what in those days was called a hot book. I tell you this to explain why a fairly large group of these new female undergraduates had, or shall we say at first believed they had, a keen interest in what they imagined I had to tell them. Mostly, I spent time roaming around, my first time here, and chatting both with the young women and then who were then so new to the campus, and with the young men who mostly complained that the, shall we say, social opportunities they believed this new state of affairs would present them with had turned out to be bitterly disappointing. But in addition to such one-on-one conversations, two rather large meetings with those so famously high-achieving young women had been arranged for me to speak to. And to this day, as you can see, these occasions have remained vivid in my mind. As I'm sure I don't have to tell you, of all people, neither of these gatherings was taken up with conversation about God or about man either, at least man in the sense with which Bill Buckley had come years earlier to set a certain, significant and growing part of the intellectual world on fire, but rather most specifically with their own men, their fathers, their brothers if they had any, and if any could in any meaningful sense rightly be called that, their lovers. In the course of our first meeting together, I will confess, these girls, there, after many years, I have finally worked up the nerve to call them that. These girls got themselves fairly quickly beyond the bounds of what could be called discussion. For one by one, they leapt to their feet to complain of this or that aspect of what turned out to be their lifelong mistreatment as females. To be sure, the women's movement that had for some years by then been supplying them with all the finer points of such grand and high-powered analysis had been around and exhaustively familiar to me. But that these new Yale undergraduates could, for the sake of mere cultural fashion, have become so quickly and so completely hostile to the truth of their privileged existence, chosen by Yale as they had been from among what were surely thousands upon tens of thousands of eager, hardworking, and accomplished young females applicants from all over the country, their complaints had, I will confess to you, taken me by surprise. Arrogant and snooty and sure of themselves, had I thought I might find them? Yes, of course. After all, not without considerable reason. But oppressed? I listened to their complaints for some time with a growing sense of unreality. However, before the evening's discussion was over, God, as is his sometimes mysterious wont, did not desert me. For from the back of the room, I saw a girl whom I knew well. She had indeed for some years been the best friend of one of my daughters. I saw her stand up and declare that she had, since her earliest days in the cradle, been socialized. You remember all this stuff. That's the way they talk. Socialized to be no more than a proper lady, taught that it was wrong for her to strive, and brought up merely to be in every aspect no more than the wife of an accomplished and successful husband. Many of you may not, lo, these 40 years later, have been fully introduced to every detail in this description of women's oppression. The times and the indictments have quieted down considerably since then, but it probably would have been impossible to become a viable candidate for studying at Yale without having been instructed in at least its main lines of argument. And I should, of course, have known that. In any case, as I said, God did not desert me on that occasion. Emily, I said when the young woman had finished ranting, I have known you for a long time, and I know your family well. If there is one girl in this university who was brought up with the idea that nothing would do short of her becoming, at the very least, the first female president of the United States, it's you. Need I say that after the eruption of shouted objections that followed, the meeting did not last for much longer. And need I further say that the next gathering arranged for me to meet with the young women was considerably more sparsely attended. The conversation on this second occasion would at least not have taken me by surprise, for this meeting was to be devoted to a discussion of publishing, a field that had, in fact, for some time by then, as was the case, been aspired to by women, and not without a considerable amount of success. But by now, of course, I had come to be almost more alarmed by my conversation with the female underclassmen at Yale than I had been reading those mad radical tracts written by women who are now busy leading the movement they so perversely called feminism. In any case, I was by then well prepared for what would be facing me and feeling more than a little mischievous. Now, for my stay at the college, I had been given a rather luxurious dorm room featuring what were to me two highly impressive accoutrements. The first was a switch with which one could warm the tiles that made up the room's floor. No matter what happened to the denizens of that dorm at Yale, cold feet would play no part in it. And the second was a night table on which were piled a variety of booklets and pamphlets informing the room's occupant of the many and various conveniences available to her either on or near the campus. Among them, in addition to the various institutions and locations nearby for her entertainment, a birth control dispensary offering an impressive variety of means available for such, an emergency psychiatric office, and, need I mention, an abortion clinic. Thus, when we had settled down for our discussion, and the question so predictably arose as to how I myself had managed, as the young aspirants put it, to break into publishing, I succeeded in bringing both the conversation and my time at Yale to their collective end by answering, perfectly truthfully, by the way, that I had studied typing. Now, for you Facebookers and Twitterers, by the way, that means the rapid and accurate use of a now discarded piece of technology called a typewriter. In other words, that I had, luckily for me, taken a class in typing during my second year of high school. From there, in my case, as in many another I could tell them of, my future in publishing, had resulted from a various combination of time, sweat, financial need for both unhappy and happy reasons, and luck, also of the good and bad kind.